My name is Paige. I am 32 years old and I am the chief financial officer of a rapidly growing tech firm in the city. But tonight, I am nobody. I stood in the darkest corner of the Riverside Crystal Ballroom and clutched a glass of the house red wine. It tasted like vinegar and cheap grapes. My mother Brenda had made it very clear earlier that evening that the premium open bar was for the VIP guests only. I looked down at my dress. It was a simple black sheath I had purchased 3 years ago for a funeral. It was the only garment I was allowed to wear because Brenda had sent me a text 3 days ago with strict instructions. She told me not to dare wear anything flashy. She said, "This is Austin and Kayla big night," and told me not to try to outshine him like I always do. The room smelled of expensive cologne and fresh orchids. It was the kind of engagement party that screamed old money and effortless success. The venue sat right on the riverfront with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. I watched my brother Austin and his fiancée Kayla holding court in the center of the room. Austin was wearing a bespoke navy suit that I knew cost $2,000 because the invoice had come to my email last week. Kayla was dripping in pearls and laughing with her head thrown back so everyone could see her perfect teeth. They looked like royalty. They looked like a couple who had never worried about a bill in their lives. The only problem was that none of the money was theirs, and the success was entirely a fabrication. Austin had never worked a real day in his life, and his current business venture was little more than a website and a pile of debt. The clinking of a silver spoon against a champagne flute cut through the chatter. My mother stood on the small stage at the front of the room. Her face was flushed with the kind of glow that comes from 3 glasses of expensive Chardonnay and the thrill of being the center of attention. She adjusted the microphone and beamed at the crowd of 100 guests. She looked elegant in her silk gown, but I could see the sharpness in her eyes that always appeared right before she said something cruel. "My Austin is a star," she cooed into the microphone. Her voice was slightly slurred, but amplified enough to reach every corner of the hall. "He is a true visionary and a self-made entrepreneur. We are so blessed to have a son who knows how to go out there and conquer the world." She paused for applause and the room obliged. Then her eyes scanned the crowd and found me in the shadows. She pointed a manicured finger in my direction. "And then there is Paige, our little penny pincher. Look at that dress she is wearing. I think she must hunt for bargains in the clearance bin at the thrift store. But I suppose every family needs one struggling artist type to keep us humble. We are just lucky Austin knows how to make the real money, or we would all be in trouble." Laughter rippled through the room. It was not a polite chuckle, it was a roar. I saw Austin smirk and raise his glass in a mock salute to me. Kayla covered her mouth to hide a giggle while glancing at my old dress. My face burned, but I did not look away. I had spent a decade swallowing these insults. I told myself it was the price of having a family. I told myself that if I just paid enough bills and solved enough problems, they would eventually love me. I stood there frozen while the people I supported mocked me for the very frugality that allowed me to fund their lifestyle. Then I felt a sharp vibration against my hip. I pulled my phone from my clutch. The screen lit up with a single notification from my banking app. It read, "Transaction alert. Your checking account ending in 4589 has been charged $5,000 for Riverside event services." I stared at the numbers. $5,000. That was the deposit for the venue where my mother was currently standing and mocking my poverty, the venue where my brother was playing the rich businessman while wearing a suit I paid for, the venue where the wine I was not allowed to drink was flowing freely. I looked up from the screen. My mother was still laughing at her own joke. A strange calmness settled over me. It was colder than the air conditioning. In the scripts of my life, I usually cried in the bathroom or left early in shame. Not tonight. I took a slow sip of my terrible wine. I unlocked my phone and took a screenshot of the transaction. Then I opened my notes app and typed one line. "The Bank of Paige is officially closed." I slipped the phone back into my bag and smiled. It was the last free thing they would ever get from me. I walked back to my assigned seat at the very back of the room near the kitchen service doors. My wine glass was empty, but my mind was overflowing with a cold and mathematical clarity. I sat there while the DJ played upbeat jazz, and I let my memory rewind 10 years. It was a decade defined by silence and expensive secrets. My father, Robert, loved to play the part of the tycoon. He wore Italian loafers and smoked imported cigars, but the man could not run a lemonade stand without driving it into insolvency. His last 3 business ventures had imploded quietly, and I was the one who swept up the financial debris so the neighbors would not whisper. Then there was Austin. My brother dropped out of community college after 1 semester because he said the professors were too intimidated by his intellect. My parents called him a misunderstood genius who needed time to find his path. I called him unemployed and delusional. I pulled my phone out again and opened my notes app. It was time to look at the ledger I had kept hidden in the back of my mind for too long. I started typing a list. First was the house. My parents lived in a pristine 4-bedroom colonial in the most expensive school district in the county. They told everyone they had paid it off years ago thanks to Robert's shrewd investments. The truth was buried in my banking app. I had refinanced that mortgage 5 years ago under my own name when the bank threatened foreclosure. The deed might say family home, but the credit score holding the roof up belonged to Paige. Next was the car. I looked across the room at Austin. He was leaning against the bar and twirling a set of keys to a brand new Range Rover. He told Kayla and her parents that he bought it with his cryptocurrency earnings. I typed the number $1,200 into my phone. That was the monthly payment that automatically left my account every first of the month. He drove the status symbol, but I paid for the lease and the insurance. Then came the lifestyle. My mother, Brenda, posted photos from Paris and Rome every summer. She captioned them, "Living the Dream." I looked at my credit card statement from last July. $6,000 for flights, $4,000 for hotels. I paid it all because they said they needed a break from the stress of being so successful. I stared at the glowing screen until the white letters blurred together. For years I told myself this was love. I thought that if I became the safety net, they would finally stop looking at me with disappointment. I thought that every check I wrote was a down payment on their affection. I was wrong. The speech tonight was the final audit. They did not see me as a savior or a daughter. To them, I was just a utility. I was like the electricity or the running water. You do not thank the light switch for turning on. You only curse it when it stops working. And just like a tool, I was not supposed to have feelings. I was just supposed to work until I broke. I kept my head down and shielded the screen of my phone with my hand like I was shielding a flame from the wind. I opened the banking application and watched the little loading circle spin. It felt like I was arming a bomb. I navigated to the credit card tab and selected the platinum card I had authorized for my father 2 years ago. He had begged for it with tears in his eyes, saying he needed a way to pay for travel expenses to launch his new consulting business. He swore he would only use it for flights and client dinners. I scrolled down to the statement from last month. He had told me he was in Chicago for a week to meet with investors. I looked at the dates, October 14th through October 17th. There were no airline charges. There were no charges for a hotel in Illinois. Instead, I saw 3 separate charges for a place called the Sapphire Inn, which was a boutique hotel less than 20 minutes from my parents' house. Below that was a charge for $600 at a jewelry store called the Golden Locket. I glanced up at my mother across the room. She was wearing the same tarnished gold studs she had owned since I was a child. That jewelry was not for her. My father was not building a business. He was using my credit score to fund a local affair while I sat at home eating instant noodles to save money. My stomach twisted into a hard knot, but I forced myself to keep scrolling. I switched tabs to the joint savings account history I shared with my mother. I searched for the date 3 months ago when she called me sobbing in agony. She had told me her spinal stenosis was critical and she needed immediate laser surgery that her insurance refused to cover. She sounded so frail and terrified that I had liquidated my entire emergency fund to send her $15,000. I found the transfer in the log. But there was no payment to a surgeon. There was no invoice from a hospital. On the exact same day the money hit the account, there was a cash withdrawal for $10,000 at a location inside the Lucky Star Casino. The remaining $5,000 was transferred to a digital wallet labeled Austin Ventures. She had not been in pain. She had looked me in the eye and lied about her health so she could split my life savings between a slot machine and my brother's fraudulent cryptocurrency scheme. The phone felt heavy in my hand like a stone. I looked up at them again. They were not just bad with money. They were liars. They had weaponized my love and my fear for their safety to feed their vices. They did not see me as a daughter to be cherished. They saw me as a naive bank vault to be looted. The last drop of empathy I held for them evaporated in the air-conditioned room. I looked down at the little green toggle switches next to each card on the screen. One by one, I slid them to the locked position. My father's card, locked. My mother's access, locked. The card Austin was likely carrying in his pocket right now, locked. A notification popped up confirming the status. The financial lifeline was cut. I took a deep breath and felt a cold and terrifying freedom wash over me. 3 days had passed since the night I stopped being a daughter and started being a stranger. I had wasted no time. I packed my essentials and vacated the luxury condo I legally owned, but had foolishly allowed Austin to occupy rent-free for 5 years. I was now sitting on the balcony of a new apartment in a gated complex with a doorman who did not know my last name. The coffee in my mug was hot, and for the first time in my life, it tasted like peace. My phone began to vibrate on the glass table. The screen flashed the name Austin. I let it ring twice before sliding the green icon. I wanted to hear the panic in his voice. "Paige, what the hell is going on?" he screamed before I could even say hello. The background noise was chaotic. I could hear the rustle of fabric and the low murmur of other men. "I am standing at the counter at the Gilded Stitch," he hissed. "I am trying to pay for my custom tuxedo and the suits for the groomsmen. The total is $2,000, and the card just declined." I took a slow sip of my espresso. "Oh, really?" I said with a flat voice. "That is strange." "It is not strange. It is embarrassing," he shouted. The cashier ran it 3 times. "Everyone is staring at me. Paige, my friends are right here. Fix it right now. Transfer the money or unlock the card. I do not have time for your incompetence today." His entitlement was breathtaking. He truly believed that the money was a natural resource he had a right to harvest. He did not ask. He demanded. He was furious not because he was broke, but because his magic wallet had stopped working. I leaned back in my chair and watched a bird fly past the balcony. I recalled the speech Brenda gave 3 nights ago. I remembered the laughter. "Austin listened to me very carefully," I said. "Mom told everyone on Saturday that I am a failure. She said I am poor and I hunt for bargains in the clearance bin. Remember." There was a stunned silence on the other end. I could hear his breathing hitch. So I continued. "Why would a wealthy and successful entrepreneur like you need to borrow a credit card from a broke loser like me? It does not make sense, does it?" "Paige, stop this," he sputtered. "You are the golden boy," I said. "Figure it out yourself." I ended the call and immediately pressed the block contact button. The silence that followed was the most expensive luxury I had ever purchased. My phone did not stop vibrating for the next 4 hours. It danced across the coffee table like a possessed object. I watched the notifications stack up on the lock screen without touching it. My father Robert sent a barrage of texts that were blistering with rage. He called me an ungrateful daughter and accused me of sabotaging the family legacy. He wrote that I was selfish for making a scene just because my feelings were hurt. He said I had humiliated Austin in front of his peers and that I owed him an immediate apology. Then came the voicemails from Brenda. There were 10 of them in total. I listened to the first one on speaker while I opened my laptop. Her voice was thick with tears, but the manipulation was razor-sharp. She sobbed that I was destroying the family happiness over one harmless joke. She asked how I could be so petty and vindictive when my brother was about to start his new life. She claimed I was jealous of his success and that my bitterness was ugly. She never once asked if I was okay. She only cared that the credit card machine had stopped working. I did not reply to a single message. Instead, I poured myself another glass of wine and opened a blank document on my computer. I spent the entire night working with the focus of a forensic accountant. I took screenshots of every begging text message Austin had sent me over the last 5 years. I downloaded the bank statements that showed the mortgage payments leaving my personal account. I arranged the credit card bills that proved my father was spending money at the Sapphire Inn and the Golden Locket. I highlighted the withdrawals my mother made at the Lucky Star Casino on the dates she claimed to be in surgery. By 3 a.m, the document was finished. It was a 20-page PDF file of pure, indisputable truth. I saved the file with a title that would make them choke on their morning coffee. The Receipts Who Actually Pays for This Family. It was the most dangerous thing I had ever written, and it was ready to launch. It was exactly 7 days before the wedding was scheduled to take place. My family was busy spinning a web of lies that was becoming more tangled by the hour. I heard from a cousin that Austin was telling the groomsmen that a massive security breach at our bank had frozen all our assets for safety. He claimed it was a sophisticated cyber attack targeting high-net-worth individuals. It was a pathetic fabrication designed to buy time while they frantically applied for loans that they would never get approved. They were still pretending to be victims of circumstance rather than victims of their own greed. I sat at the desk in my new apartment with a cup of tea steaming beside my laptop. My cursor hovered over the send button. The distribution list was a masterpiece of calculated social destruction. I had included every single guest on the wedding invitation list. I added the wealthy parents of his fiancée Kayla, who believed Austin was a cryptocurrency genius. I added the 3 angel investors my father was currently trying to woo for his consulting firm. I even added Reverend Miller from the First Baptist Church where my mother held the title of head deaconess. I took a deep breath and looked at the attachment one last time. The subject line was simple. It read, "Clarification regarding financial status and banking errors." I began the email with a short introduction stating that I wanted to clear up the confusion about why credit cards were being declined. Then I let the numbers speak for themselves. Item 1 was the invoice for the engagement party. I attached the receipt for $5,000 with a note that said the party where I was publicly mocked for being poor was entirely funded by my salary. Item 2 was the lease agreement for the Range Rover. I wrote that Austin does not own this vehicle. I do. Attached are 36 monthly payments of $1,200 each. Item 3 was the credit card statement for my father. I highlighted the dates and wrote Robert claimed these charges at the Sapphire Inn were for business travel to Chicago. Unless his business involves purchasing diamond earrings at the Golden Locket for a woman named Stacy, this is a misappropriation of funds. Item 4 was the bank transfer log for my mother. I wrote Brenda solicited $15,000 from me for emergency spinal surgery. The attached log shows the money was immediately transferred to a wagering account at the Lucky Star Casino. I typed the final conclusion with a steady hand. I wrote, I am officially resigning as the unconditional financier of this family. I am stopping all funding for this circus effective immediately. Good luck paying for the cake. I clicked send and watched the progress bar slide across the screen. The truth was out, and it was going to burn everything down. My phone was vibrating so intensely against the table that it sounded like an angry hornet, but I did not pick it up. I simply slid the device into airplane mode and turned my attention to the large monitor on my desk. I had logged into the Ring security camera system that watched over the driveway of my parents' house. I had paid for the system 3 years ago, and nobody had ever bothered to change the password. I sat back with a fresh cup of coffee and prepared to watch the empire fall in high definition. The fallout from the email was immediate and catastrophic. I watched as Kayla parents stormed out of the front door. Her father looked like he was ready to commit a felony. He threw a velvet ring box at Austin's feet and spat on the pavement before ushering his weeping daughter into their sedan. The wedding was dead, but the main event was just pulling around the corner. A massive flatbed tow truck rumbled down the pristine suburban street. It was bright yellow and loud. It was the kind of vehicle that did not belong in a neighborhood where people worried about lawn manicures. The driver backed the truck up to the glossy black Range Rover with practiced efficiency. My family did not know that I had quietly ceased making the lease payment 60 days ago. I had let the account go delinquent on purpose because I knew this moment would be the perfect exclamation point to my resignation. My mother Brenda flew out of the front door. She was wearing a silk robe and screaming so loud the microphone on the camera clipped the audio. She ran toward the tow truck driver and began hitting his arm. She was shrieking my name. "Paige, you ungrateful witch! Stop this right now!" She yelled at the sky as if I could hear her from the clouds. She tried to physically block the truck from lifting the vehicle. It was a display of pure, unadulterated desperation. Austin did not move. He stood on the concrete in his socks and stared blankly as the repo man hooked the chains to the undercarriage. That car was his entire personality. It was the only thing that made him feel like a man. Now it was being hoisted into the air like a piece of scrap metal. Then I noticed the neighbors. Mrs. Higgins from across the street was standing on her lawn with her phone held high. She was recording every second of the meltdown. I knew that video would be trending on TikTok before the sun went down. The driver ignored my mother's screaming and drove away with the last shred of their dignity strapped to the bed of his truck. I foolishly believed that public humiliation would force them into hiding. I underestimated their capacity for delusion. 2 days after the Range Rover was repossessed, I was served with legal papers. They did not apologize. They did not reflect on their greed. They doubled down. They hired a strip mall attorney who smelled like stale tobacco and filed a civil suit against me. The accusations were breathtaking in their audacity. They claimed I had misappropriated family funds by cutting off access to accounts they believed were jointly owned. They even cited an obscure filial responsibility law, arguing that I had a legal duty to maintain their standard of living simply because they had raised me. I arranged for the meeting to take place at the offices of my best friend Chloe. She was a senior partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. Her office was a fortress of glass and steel that overlooked the financial district. It was a space designed to intimidate, and it was working on everyone except my parents. They marched into the conference room with the unearned confidence of people who had never faced a real consequence. Robert wore a suit that was visibly tight around the waist. Brenda wore oversized sunglasses indoors to hide her puffy eyes. Austin trailed behind them, looking sullen and playing with his phone. Their lawyer looked nervous as he took in the polished mahogany table and the expensive art on the walls. He knew he was completely out of his depth. My father slammed his hand onto the table before he even sat down. "You think you are smart, Paige?" He spat the words at me. "You think you can humiliate us and steal our cars and walk away? You owe us. We fed you. We housed you. You are going to pay us $5,000 a month in support, or we will drag your name through every court in this state." My mother nodded in agreement. Her lips were pursed in a tight line. "You have a duty to this family," she hissed. "You cannot just leave us to starve while you sit in your ivory tower. It is cruel and it is illegal." They stared at me with pure hatred. They truly believed that I would be terrified. They thought I would pull out my checkbook just to make the yelling stop like I always did. They had no idea that I was not there to negotiate a settlement. I was there to deliver a death blow. Chloe did not flinch at their threats. She simply adjusted her silk blazer and reached into her leather briefcase. She pulled out a thick black folder and tossed it onto the center of the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy thud that made their cheap lawyer jump in his seat. "That is not a settlement offer," Chloe said. Her voice was calm and dangerously low. "That is a criminal file." My father looked at the folder with confusion. "What is this?" he asked. Chloe leaned forward and clasped her hands. "When you filed a lawsuit claiming financial dependency, you gave my firm the right to conduct a full discovery of your financial history to determine eligibility. We dug deep, Robert. We went all the way back to the estate records of your late mother, Margaret Murphy." The color drained from my father's face so fast, it looked like he had seen a ghost. My mother stopped breathing. "We found a trust fund," Chloe continued mercilessly. "It was established by Margaret specifically for Paige's education. The principal amount was $100,000. It was scheduled to be released to the beneficiary upon her 18th birthday. I felt the air leave my lungs. $100,000. I had spent 10 years drowning in student loans. I had worked double shifts at a coffee shop while studying for my finance degree. I had eaten instant noodles for dinner more nights than I could count because the interest rates were suffocating me. And all that time, the money I needed was sitting there. Or rather, it had been sitting there. The records show that the entire account was liquidated 3 days after Paige turned 18, Chloe said. She flipped the folder open to a photocopied document. It was a withdrawal form. At the bottom was a signature that read, Paige. But the loop on the P was wrong. The slant was backwards. It was not my handwriting. It was my mother's handwriting. You forged her signature, Chloe stated. You stole $100,000 from your own daughter and used it to pay off your gambling debts and buy a new boat. That is not a misunderstanding, Brenda. That is grand larceny. That is forgery. That is embezzlement. My mother let out a strangled sound and collapsed back into her chair. She looked small and withered. Her arrogance had evaporated completely. Their lawyer looked at the document and then at his clients. He began to pack his briefcase. I cannot represent you in a criminal defense case, he muttered. I am out. Chloe looked at my parents with eyes like flint. Here is the situation. I have drafted a contract. It outlines the terms of your surrender. You sign it today, or I walk this file down to the district attorney's office. You are 60 years old, Robert. Do you think you will survive 5 to 10 years in a federal prison? My father tried to speak, but no sound came out. He looked at Austin for support, but my brother was staring at his shoes. Austin knew exactly where that money had gone. He had enjoyed the boat. He had enjoyed the vacations. He was just as guilty as they were. The room was silent except for the sound of their perfect world shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Chloe slid the settlement agreement across the polished mahogany table. It was a heavy document that detailed the total surrender of my parents. My father stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. He looked defeated. His arrogance had finally been stripped away by the threat of a felony indictment. I leaned forward and placed my hands on the table. I explained the terms clearly. Clause 1 states that you will transfer the full legal title and deed of your home to me immediately. This transfer is non-negotiable and serves as restitution for the $100,000 you stole from my trust fund, plus the 10 years of mortgage payments I made on your behalf. The equity in the house barely covers what you owe me, but I am feeling generous enough to call it even. My mother let out a small gasp. But where will we live? She whispered. I pointed to the second page of the contract. Clause 2 outlines your living arrangements. You are granted a revocable lease to reside in the guest house behind the main property. It is a studio apartment above the garage. It is 400 square feet. It is small, but it is a roof over your heads, which is more than you gave me when I moved out at 18. The main house will be renovated and rented out to tenants who actually pay their bills. The rental income will go directly to me. Austin slammed his fist on the table. You are putting Mom and Dad in the garage. That is insane. What about me? Where am I supposed to sleep? I looked at my brother with zero sympathy. Clause 3 concerns you, Austin. You are evicted effectively immediately. You are 30 years old and you are able-bodied. You are no longer the golden child. You are an unemployed adult. You will not receive a single penny from our parents because they have no money left to give you. I suggest you update your resume. Austin looked at our father for help, but Robert just stared at the table. He knew he had no leverage. Finally, I tapped the last page. Clause 4 is a non-disclosure agreement. You are permanently forbidden from mentioning my name or my business on social media or in the press. You will not post about me. You will not tag me. You will not tell sob stories to the neighbors about your cruel daughter. If you violate this clause, I will evict you from the guest house, and Chloe will proceed with the criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. My father picked up the pen. His hand was trembling so violently that the tip of the pen rattled against the paper. He signed his name. Then my mother signed hers. Tears dripped from her chin onto the signature line. Austin refused to look at me as he stormed out of the room to face a world that would not coddle him. I watched them sign away their pride and their assets. I waited for a surge of joy or a pang of guilt, but neither came. I felt nothing but a profound sense of relief. It was the feeling of a heavy fever finally breaking. It was the sensation of a surgeon removing a malignant tumor that had been draining the life out of a patient for decades. I was not happy. I was simply free. 6 months later, I drove my new convertible down the street where I grew up. It was a crisp autumn afternoon. I slowed down as I approached the property that I now owned. The main house looked immaculate. I had used the rental income to repaint the siding a fresh white and fix the roof. It finally looked like a home instead of a facade. I saw 2 figures in the driveway. My parents were there. They were wearing plain clothes and holding brooms. They were sweeping the fallen leaves from the pavement. It was the exact chore they used to force me to do every Saturday morning while Austin watched cartoons inside. They looked older and smaller. They stopped sweeping when they heard my engine. They looked up and saw me behind the wheel. My mother raised her hand slightly as if to wave, but then she dropped it. She remembered the contract. She remembered the boundary. There was no wave. There was no smile. There was just a silent acknowledgement of the new order. I did not wave back. I pressed the gas pedal and drove past them without looking in the rearview mirror. I drove straight to my own apartment in the city. I walked onto my balcony and poured myself a glass of expensive Cabernet. I was wearing a silk robe that I bought with my own bonus check. The city lights twinkled below me. I took a sip of the wine and savored the taste of ownership. For 32 years they had told me I was useless. They were wrong. I was not useless. I was a survivor. And for the first time in my life, I was finally whole.